Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 to 8. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the peoples, chief priests, and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi and secretly found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him."
I'm reading from Matthew chapter 2, verses 9 to 18. After they'd heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they'd seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, of incense, and of myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. When they'd gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said, "take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child and kill him." So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." When Herod realized he'd been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he'd learned from the Magi. Then was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more.
We're going to turn to Matthew chapter 2 and the first 18 verses of that chapter. The other day I was in the pub. Shock horror. But I'd called in because one of the bar staff there was going overseas for a break, and I wanted to wish her bon voyage. And on the table next to me, where I was sitting there hugging my Pepsi Max, there was 6 ladies of various temperaments and outlooks, one of whom was very much dominating the conversation, a very outspoken lady. And she happened to say within my hearing, "Of course, you know that most of this stuff that we talk about at Christmas is not even in the Bible." And one of her friends said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "Well, like, for example, the manger. It's never mentioned in the Bible." And up until this point, I'd been paying no attention to their conversation really at all, or as little as I could, given how loud she was talking. But at this point, I said, I don't suppose you mind if I join in. And I'm not sure the lady who was being very loud was very keen on the idea, but the others were very pleased to have my input. And I talked to them about the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke and what the Bible says, including that the baby Jesus was laid in a manger. And the loud lady came back at me and she said, well, you don't even have any proof that Jesus ever existed outside of the Bible. And I listed for her about 5 sources that are secular manuscripts that were written shortly after Jesus' lifetime where he is mentioned. And she kind of took that one in her stride. And she says, well, you surely don't expect me to go along to a church and listen to all this, and she used a rather vulgar word, which I will not use in church, that these old men with beards spout in those churches. And I said, well, I'm not an old man and I don't have a beard, but I'm one of those people who spouts this stuff. And so everybody was rather about this, because I guess I don't look the role or something. And it was an interesting conversation, mostly because some of the things she was talking about, she'd apparently learned from a documentary that was on the BBC over the Christmas holidays. And it's a terrible thing to have to pitch yourself against the weight of the British Broadcasting Corporation, but I think I coped. And 5 of the ladies at the end of the conversation went their happy way and thanked me for my contribution to their discussion, and the 6th one chunted at me rather, and she said, you do realise that this is a pub and not a church, don't you? I said, well, you were the one who started the conversation, and so we went. And so I'm quite fond of making a nuisance of myself when the occasion arises. But it is interesting to me with the story of Christmas, and I've made this point several times over the last few weeks, that a lot of things that we tend to believe about Christmas aren't in the Bible, and some of the things that are in the Bible we neglect. For example, if you were to believe the way that we talk about Christmas, you would think that in the story of the arrival of the Magi, or the wise men, there were 4 kings. 4, Darren? I've never heard that before. Yeah, 4 kings. The 3 wise men we sometimes call the 3 kings, and King Herod. Now, in all likelihood, it is true that the 3 wise men were not kings. The Bible, in its original language, refers to them as magi. I remember some years ago, Peter Cook, the comedian, doing a spoof on the Christmas scene, and he was playing a character who came to see the baby Jesus, and he said, I've come to see the baby Jesus, and my name is Maggie. And obviously he wasn't Magi, he was Magi, and that is more closely related to our word magic than being a king. And Herod, who even in this translation of the Bible is referred to as a king, was more of a governor and an overseer that brought together the Roman and Jewish communities in and around this part of Israel and Judea. So it is a complicated story. One of our Christmas carols tells us, get this one. This is, as with gladness, men of old. It says, as with joyful steps they sped to that lowly manger bed, as they offered gifts most rare at that manger rude and bare. Now, what we know from what the Bible says is that the wise men who were being interrogated by Herod told him of the time that the star first appeared, and after that Herod sent his guard in the plural sense, to slaughter all the babies under the age of 2. So the likelihood is that these wise men, these magi, had been traveling for a long time. The chances that Jesus, as parents, could not find a room at the inn on the night he was born are accounted for in the Bible. The fact that once people started to return to their own homes after they had been counted, and Jesus, as parents, were still not able to find room at the inn, are unlikely. So the wise men finding Jesus still in a manger when he might have been anything up to 2 years old seem very unlikely indeed. It's quite interesting. I remember, I'm dipping into old comedy today, but I remember a scene from a Alf Garnett comedy many years ago, where he was talking to one of the members of his family, and he said, well, stupid, weren't they? Stupid. You know, fancy going to Bethlehem at Christmas time. Make no wonder there wasn't any room in the inn if you turn up at the last minute, because Christmas for him was a holiday. He kind of missed the point of why it was a holiday. And also in our singing, we find out that we have the fact that the Magi followed a star. Now, what was this star? You know, there's been all kinds of estimations of this. People have said it was a meteor or a new star that God created specially for the purpose. Maybe it was a shooting star. That seems rather unlikely, because if you follow something for 2 years and it's a shooting star, it's probably going to have gone by the time you get there. What is quite interesting, and this is maybe something where our carol singing does inform us a little bit, and with a creative idea. Not saying it's right, but it is a creative idea. This is in the first Noel, which has an angel appearing in the first verse, and thereafter in the second verse refers to the angel as a star, a bright light in the sky. Now just suppose that where there had been an angel, there was a bright resonance thereafter. It's an interesting idea. I don't know, but I quite like that one in a sentimental sort of way. I remember when I was a teenager, 5 or 6 years ago, when I was at church on one of those sort of late night Christmas Eve services. In Yorkshire they call it a watch night service, but the services that people tend to call watch night services in London are the ones where it turns from New Year's Eve to New Year's Day. Becoming less common, I think. One of my friends had to pull his watch night service this year because there weren't enough people who wanted to come to it, and he had better things to do than talk to himself. But one year at a Christmas watch night service, the preacher talked about the reason for the gifts that the Magi brought. And I was very impressed with this. You know, I heard that gold was brought because Jesus was a king, and that frankincense was brought because Jesus was God, and that myrrh was brought because Jesus was going to die. And so the following morning I got up, being a studious kind of guy, and I dipped into the Bible and found out it's not mentioned in the Bible at all. And the story originates from the carol that we sang a little while ago, We Three Kings of Orient Are. And again, it's a nice idea. But we don't really know whether there were 3 Magi. We assume that because they had 3 gifts, but there might have been 2, there might have been 6. We don't know. And all of this came into my mind because of this discussion I was having with these 6 ladies. I have to say that if you'd asked me what age they were, I would have said they were probably in their late 70s or early 80s. And it's quite interesting that the lady who was being very cantankerous, she was saying, I wouldn't go listen to some old man with a grey beard talking about all this at a church, which is why I ensured that she could do that at the pub without leaving her chair. But it just struck me how old she thought this old man with a grey beard was. If she was maybe 77, maybe he was 10 years older than her. He ought really to have retired. But in thinking about the things that are in the Bible and the things that aren't in the Bible, you really come across the idea of a spectrum of attitudes to the Bible, and in this instance to Christmas. You know, by a spectrum I mean like a rainbow, a group of lights of different shades. And some people have a very negative attitude to what happened at Christmas. Some people have very little interest. Some people are inquiring, and other people are convinced. I guess the best example of the negative attitude, far, far more negative than the lady in the pub, was Herod. who may not have actually been a king, but was not very keen on the idea that some other king was going to pop up in his neighborhood, and wanted to do away with the possibility, quite literally. And most people are not destructively negative in that way. But some people do hate the idea of Christmas. The most famous fictional person who hated Christmas, bah humbug. You know, humbug as a negative thing didn't exist until Dickens wrote it down. Ebenezer Scrooge, famously portrayed by Michael Caine, Alistair Sim. Who did we come up with the other day when we were thinking through this, Isabel? George C. Scott. I've never seen that one. Patrick Stewart, sorry, that C is getting everywhere. Uncle Scrooge, the uncle of Donald Duck. You know, I noticed when Pat looked a little confused about Michael Caine, then obviously she needs to broaden her education. Cratchit in the one with Michael Caine was played by Kermit the Frog. And it's a classic movie version. But we can have a negative attitude to Christmas in real life. And one of the reasons we do this is that we let the modern conception of Christmas, with all its rushing around and shopping and everything, swallow up the joy of Jesus coming. Some people say to me, well, Darren, you don't really believe that Jesus was born on December the 25th, do you? And again, my answer, well, it's not in the Bible, I don't know. But, you know, there are 365, maybe 366 possibilities. It's as good as any of the others. But if Christmas on December 25th is difficult for you, then take 12 other days to meditate on the value of the birth of Jesus. Because the dashing around, you know, people grabbing things. I heard the other day there's a supermarket called Aldi. We don't have one in Hammersmith, I don't think. But there is a supermarket called Aldi, and somebody spent over £1,000 on those kind of drinks, those, what do they call those things? You know, like the things that are meant to give you energy. I guess energy drinks would be a good. Yeah, so over £1,000 because this thing at Aldi had gained so he bought over £1,000 worth of it for his sons at Christmas time. So stuff like that just strikes me as slightly mad, whatever time of year it happens. Now, the wise men, on the other hand, are further down our spectrum in that they are inquiring to an amazing degree. And they were willing to travel in an era when there were no cars, no trains, no boats or planes. And the traveling may have taken them up to 2 years to come and see something that might have taken place. And this is the attitude that everybody ought to have before they are convinced about the true meaning of Christmas. to come and look. The lady the other day said to me, well, you really don't expect me to look this up in the Bible, do you? And part of me thought, well, if I was going to go spouting off that I understood it all, then yeah, I would probably have looked it up first. But why not? If you're going to be thinking about Christmas, if you're going to be celebrating Christmas on some level, find out what it means. What is it there for? And so the wise men who probably never saw the manger or the ox and ass, but arrived at some house where Mary by then was residing, they really had inquiring hearts. We were thinking the other day about the shepherds who left their sheep on the hillside and came down to look at the baby whilst he was still in the manger. And today we're thinking about the Magi. And one of the things that occurs to me is that when we are going through this process of inquiry, God comes to us in diverse ways. The shepherds who were up in the hillside, who never got to go to the temple and meet with God because their work prevented them, God came to the hillside, or at least he sent his messenger, the angel, with a great and wonderful message. The shepherds still had a journey to make. They had to come down the hillside to see the proof of what the angel was saying. But they did far better than Zechariah, who just rejected in the first instance what the angel had said to him. But with the Magi, the wise men, whether they were kings or not, they were in all likelihood richer than the shepherds. God made them work for it. Up to 2 years of traveling to find out what it all meant. And then they saw the proof for them. But they had to come to where God was. So this 12 days of Christmas bit, it's more than a song for children, or originally it was a song, a kind of a spoof song for young lovers that was sung in the music halls and places. The golden rings weren't rings on your finger. The gold ring was around the neck of a bird. And therefore, if you consider the song in light of that information, the first 7-8 days all involve birds. So puts a whole new twist on it. But the 12 days of Christmas will be different for you than it was for the shepherds, and probably different for you than it was for the Magi. You know, if somebody said to you this Christmas, okay, mate, I've got a camel for you, get ready for a 2-year journey, then in all likelihood, you would kind of balk at the hardship. But there are other kinds of hardship that don't involve camels and don't involve journeys over rough terrain. They involve the struggle of seeking to come face to face with God. One of the people in the Bible who really, really wanted to come face to face with God was Moses. And I was suggesting earlier that maybe if the star in the sky was the resonance of where the angel had been, the presence of God, even just as his messenger, leaves a glow. And Moses, who spent time in the presence of God, we're told that his face glowed. You could spend your time at a time like Christmas investing in some artificial tan. Better to spend your time investing in meeting God. 12 days from Christmas Day to Epiphany. Took the wise men a lot longer than that. But however long it takes, it will be worth the journey if you realize at the end of it that God is there for you and he loves you. Amen.